Welcome to the deep dive. Today we're looking at something, well, pretty groundbreaking that just hit the news, but it taps into ideas thousands of years old.
Yeah, and this whole conversation really got started thanks to some fascinating thoughts from Alexander Titus in his newsletter, The Connected Ideas Project.
He's got such a unique angle on this too, having been involved with Colossal Biosciences, the company right at the center of this whole story.
Exactly, and that perspective is key because we're tackling what some people are calling the dawn of de-extinction. It really forces us to confront this huge question Titus poses. Where does a mammoth start and an elephant end?
Right. And it's way more than just wow, ancient animals. It digs into the absolute frontier of biotech, the really tough policy and ethical questions, the incredible possibilities opening up.
And honestly, what it even means to build a future that's never existed before.
So let's jump in. The big event that kicked all this off, three pups born down in Texas, Romulus, Remus, and Khaleesi.
Not just any pups, though. These are animals engineered, basically, from ancient genetic blueprints. The goal, bringing back an Ice Age apex predator, the dire wolf.
And the significance, drawing on Titus's perspective here, is potentially massive. People are calling it maybe the world's first de-extinction. Although,
Yeah, there's nuance there, as he points out.
definitely. Titus mentions his own reaction. He was genuinely thrilled, saw it as this really important, symbolic, sort of hopeful step.
But he also immediately flags that we need to look deeper, beyond the headlines and the initial excitement.
Which brings us straight to one of those key nuances. This isn't quite like firing up a time machine, is it?
No, not at all. These dire wolf pups, they aren't like perfect copies beamed from the past. Fundamentally, they're re-engineered gray wolves.
Okay, re-engineered gray wolves. How does that work exactly?
Well, they took the genome of a modern gray wolf in the basic blueprint, and then they edited it. They used ancient DNA from dire wolves to identify key traits.
Things like the bigger size, right? Broader snout.
It's exactly. Size, snout shape, thicker fur, even things like their immune system profiles. And then they used gene editing tools, like CRISPR, to tweak the gray wolf DNA to express those ancient traits. Titus mentions 14 specific genes were edited.
14 genes. You end up with pups that look and act like dire wolves.
Yeah. They exhibit the target characteristics.
But they're built on what Titus calls a modern scaffold. Like the underlying biology is still the modern gray wolf.
Precisely. It's something new, really.
Yeah.
Inspired by the past, for sure, but built using today's tech on a living relative.
And that difference, between revival and reengineering, it gets right to a core philosophical point Titus raises.
Which is that nature itself doesn't really play by our neat little categorical rules.
Right. The concept of species, it's not some hard line. He describes it more like a fluid continuum, right? Traits, probabilities, how things fit together.
Evolution just doesn't care much for our labels. It's messy.
So that mammoth elephant question isn't just a thought experiment anymore.
Not at all. If you take an Asian elephant and you edit, say, enough genes for mammoth traits, the shaggy coat, the cold adaptation stuff.
What is that animal? Is it a mammoth? A mammothant, just a very, very woolly elephant.
And Titus's answer is kind of perfect. Yes, all of the above, and none of them.
Huh. Because biology is more than just the code, the DNA sequence.
It's history, it's behavior, it's context, how the organism actually lives in its world.
So these new animals, these dire wolf pups, they're like a scientific act of interpretation.
That's a great way to put it. We're not photocopying the past, we're interpreting it using the tools and knowledge we have now.
And the amazing thing is, while this project gets headlines for de-extinction, it's actually turbocharging the whole toolbox for working with life itself.
Absolutely. Think about the technologies involved. CRISPR, multiplexing, editing lots of genes at once, reconstructing ancient DNA fragments, figuring out surrogacy for engineered embryos, developing ethical frameworks.
Okay, so these aren't just niche techniques for bringing back old animals.
No way. Titus describes them as building blocks for a kind of programmable language for genetics.
A programmable language?
Wow. Yeah, fundamental tools giving us this unprecedented ability to read, write, and edit the code of life.
And once you have that language, the applications go way beyond just dire wolves or mammoths.
Right. Titus gives examples. Maybe reviving lost traits to help currently endangered species. Colossal's already had success cloning the endangered red wolf, which is a related tech.
Or boosting genetic diversity in fragile populations.
Exactly. Or even thinking ahead to climate change, could we use these techniques to help ecosystems adapt? Maybe reintroduce cold-adapted herbivores to help manage thawing, permafrost, that kind of thing.
So for you listening, this isn't just some curiosity about the Ice Age. It's about taking lessons from the past, ancient templates, and applying them to solve potentially huge future problems.
And it's happening now. This is, like Titus says, this week's news cycle, not science fiction anymore.
And speaking of timing, it was pretty remarkable, wasn't it? The National Security Commission on Emerging Biotechnology, the NSCEB, released its big report just a day after the dire wolf news broke.
You couldn't make it up.
Yeah,
Talk about highlighting the relevance.
that report really hammers home biotech's strategic importance, right?
Right.
For national security, the economy, global leadership. It stresses how urgently we need frameworks, talent.
Yeah, it basically says, this is strategically vital, folks. We need to get organized now.
So if the NSCEB report is the formal declaration,
Then these dire wolf pups are like Exhibit A, the living, breathing reason why it's so vital.
because this isn't just about lab work anymore, it's about meaning.
It forces these profound questions Titus raises. What does it mean to create life that was gone? To engineer identity from essentially scratch? What happens when your scientific output isn't just data, but something that cries and plays?
The report gives the strategy, the need for tools, the wolves give us the stakes, the real-world impact.
So let's circle back to de-extinction, that word.
It's catchy, for sure, a real buzzword, but as Titus points out, maybe a bit misleading.
Yeah, because extinction wasn't actually undone. It's not like flicking a switch and the original creature is just back.
No, what they built is something new. Inspired by the past, yes, but built now, with today's science for a future that's totally unprecedented for that form.
Titus puts it very bluntly. This is genetic engineering. It's just wearing an Ice Age costume.
And the point isn't that that's bad. The value isn't necessarily in perfect historical accuracy.
You know, the value is in the capability developed, the boundaries pushed just by trying it.
Because that capability, that power, it's not just about old animals. It challenges our whole understanding of what life is, what it could be, maybe what it should be.
Right. If you can engineer a dire wolf analog, maybe you can engineer coral that survives warmer seas, or crops that pull down more carbon, or completely novel organisms for bioremediation, or even planetary defense someday.
The real promise, then, is the power to shape life, hopefully responsibly.
And Titus shares a bit from his perspective, having been close to this kind of work. He says some might expect cynicism, having seen how the sausage gets made.
But that's not what comes across.
No, he talks about the reality, the late nights, the tough ethical debates, the trade-offs, the sheer grind of trial and error, and just persistence to get from an idea to a living thing.
You definitely sense the pride there, not just for one company, but for the whole scientific effort pushing these frontiers.
And he makes a really important point.
Hmm.
One of the best things about this dire wolf story is that it forces a public conversation about all this complexity.
It gets people asking those big questions.
Yeah, like what does species even mean now? How do we think about the ethics? Where is this all going?
And we need to ask those questions, right? That conversation is how we figure out how to be responsible stewards of this kind of power.
Which leads to what Titus calls maybe the hardest question of all.
In a world where we now have engineered dire wolves, what defines the self?
For any living thing, what
Right.
makes it? Is it just the DNA, its origins, its memories, its purpose in the world?
It's a fascinating puzzle, isn't it? You're using historical genetic template, but raising the creature in a completely modern environment. What part is true? What's inherited versus invented?
And if that question feels really human, Titus suggests it's because it is. It's about us too.
How do we define ourselves in a future where biology might be editable? How do we think about identity when life's building blocks seem more fluid?
How do we raise the next generation, engineered or not, with both wonder and wisdom about all this?
It really suggests the future depends as much on our stories, our understanding, as it does on the raw science.
Yeah, absolutely.
So, bringing it back, where does a mammoth start and an elephant end?
Titus doesn't pretend to draw that exact line. I don't think anyone can, really.
But the core takeaway seems clear. The future isn't going to be neatly divided by species labels. It's going to be shaped by whether we ask the right questions before we engineer the answers.
It's a powerful thought. These pups are a living reminder. The past isn't dead.
It's programmable.
Yeah.
Welcome to the age of engineered life. We're definitely just getting started.
So as you think about all this, maybe consider what responsibility comes when life itself becomes programmable, How might that change how we see identity, not just for these engineered animals, but maybe for all life, including ourselves? What does it mean to be human in that kind of future?